History has taught us one thing, and that's video game adaptations have encountered about as much success as I do when I say I'm going on a diet. Eventually, I'll run right back to that bag of Oreos and smash a glass of beer down me like a fucking weapon until I realise that there's little hope to become anything more, so why fucking bother?
Fan fucking dabby dozy.
That's likely how a lot of people felt when going into the series, that if it failed, it's back to the beauty that was the game. And can you blame anyone for feeling that way? Especially after being let down on multiple occasions over the past year by Hollywood and various studios across the globe that have gone into business for themselves so hard they're actively defending the shit that's being churned out today, as if it's anything but mind-numbing agenda-based content with vast arrays of tokenisms thrown in. I was among the many though that were cautiously optimistic about another video game adaptation when you consider that this is some of the quality we've received in the past. The hope here, however, for the writers at least, was that they could coast on the goodwill of fans from the games and the bizarre fascination with Pedro Pascal right now to push things forward. But for the smarter, more dedicated audience members, we would be assessing this more closely, looking for any discrepancies, condescending beats to the original story, lack of maturity, and most importantly, clickers. Like, seriously, the budget couldn't have stretched for a couple more. Anyway, that all comes across rather negative for a cold opening, so allow me to clarify how I truly feel about this series. Minus a couple of points of contention, this series was a decent rendition of a popular IP. The foreboding atmosphere throughout the entire show left me on edge at the end of every episode that mattered in terms of the central narrative. This was an intense, brutal, thrilling, and impactful series of events that unfold naturally and uncomfortably realistic, from the dangers of your environment, the unsettling monstrous creatures that traverse the lands, and to the lows that humanity will stoop to when they become desperate. This was a bleak, horrifying, and unforgiving world that makes you question your morals, debate aspects that you would perform in the game without second thought, and leave us with the question, did Joel make the right choice?
No. Yes! No. Yes! No. Yes!
The themes of the story are punctuated with grim consequences for selfish choices and difficult decisions, where every choice made in this could dictate what becomes of you tomorrow, as seen with Henry, Sam, Tommy, Marlene, and eventually Joel. Speaking of, let's discuss Joel for a second. He is thankfully still allowed to be that assertive, strategic, and ruthless brute we know him to be from the games, but not without compassion for Ellie. He dominates where it counts and is portrayed by Pedro Pascal better than I thought he could achieve. The switch up to his character here, however, is a decision that I do enjoy. Joel's allowed to show vulnerability in places and be more open with himself, to physically demonstrate the internal struggle he's feeling throughout this journey, and rediscovers himself by the end, tapping into the paternal instinct to fuel him once more, knowing he is capable of being that father figure again. Pedro Pascal brought an intensity to the role that I didn't think he could. But from the first beatdown of the federal officer, to aiding Ellie evading the clickers and the bloater, to his eventual rundown through the hospital was powerful, nuanced, showed competence without feeling overpowered, and delivered a cathartic conclusion that summarised many viewers' favourite part of the game. This version of Joel was refined but expanded on in an effective way. He follows a lot of the same beats, and even the scripting is pulled straight from the source at times, but Pedro made this his own and sets it apart from the excellent works of Troy Baker. Moving on to Ellie, however, both the character direction and actress choices are aspects I'm still not sure on. I can't tell if it comes down to just Ashley Johnson in general, who's always been a favourite of mine from the stellar works that she's done, or if it's from the idea of having Ellie actualised on screen, and I'm having a hard time of making that disconnect between this version of her and the game, but something never feels right. I will admit that as the season progresses, she becomes a little more palatable and easier to watch for me, but to begin with, she's rather insufferable and contentious. Almost willing to pick fights with Joel and others around her, whereas in the games, the arrogance to her character has some naivety and innocence behind it. In this instance though, it just feels deliberate, like she has to be stronger than everyone else around her. Though you could argue and assume that that's just the attitude she's developed, given the environment that she's grown up around, but it comes off feeling forced at times. Bella Ramsey isn't terrible as Ellie, but for me, she's far from a natural fit for such a role, and her acting range at times is rather direct, shall we say, with the emotional nuances feeling lost to her until the show is almost done in its final act when we get the performance of a lifetime in episode 8. Throughout the majority of this, Pedro is definitely doing the heavy lifting, but special mention has to go to Lamar Johnson, Mel Linsky, Kivon Montreal Woodard, Scott Shepard, Troy Baker, and Ashley Johnson, who nailed it in their key roles from the games or otherwise. They were all phenomenal and in some cases vital elements to get right. In terms of the less consequential installments for the season, shall we say, Bill and Frank was a beautifully told tale of finding love in a world of horror which I can absolutely get behind. Nick Offerman and Murray Bartlett knocked it out the fucking park in terms of acting and delivery, and the story was well written, but sadly, this was a rather self-indulgent episode that doesn't progress anything going on in the main plot, which sours the experience a little, but overall, it was a solid entry. Whereas, Riley and Ellie's side quest from the Last of Us DLC package was just there for me, and possibly the weakest of the season. I didn't feel like I cared about either character any more than I did going into it. They were just two kids trying to find themselves in a hopeless world, which is fine, but in terms of the wider narrative, what does it actually do? I get that they're trying to convey context for Ellie, but I just didn't care. The lack of infected in a post-apocalyptic survival horror was disappointing, but frustratingly effective. I won't lie, to see Joel and Ellie barely encounter any beyond episode 5 was rather crushing considering how many you need to get through throughout the game, but as I said, when they were there, they were used extremely well. The makeup and the effects were far better than half the shit that we're receiving from Disney and Marvel right now, and you can tell that HBO invested their money. The runners were pretty common as you could use practical effects at a lower cost with a little CG to touch them up, but the clickers and bloater looked incredible. They were devastating against Kathleen and her men, and the bloater especially could have been positioned as a mission to maneuver around later on in the series, but I also appreciate the limited use to generate that concern for our characters as they traverse the harsh landscapes where at any point they could encounter one. And there is a possibility that they did, just off screen. For a survival horror though, a lot of that came from our human antagonists, which could leave room for season 2 to pick up our shattered hopes and give us more intense moments with the physical threats from the infected of this world, but again, only time will tell. Though it was incredibly poignant to make the humans the larger threat to Joel and Ellie throughout this series, whereas in the games they were equally as damaging as the infected. Joel's eventual decision with Ellie has been widely debated for the longest of times and truly makes for a tense situation entering season 2, and I'm glad that it was kept as it was. I do feel the finale was rushed and skipped over one of my favourite moments in the game where you must confront a crew of infected in the tunnels, but I can appreciate the refined nature to it just hitting those emotional notes. Running back through this like I have, however, I can say that this show is the best example of balancing expectations and a near perfect video game adaptation, where you make it fun for yourself in the writing department and adjust the relevance of certain events, acknowledge the limitations of presenting this in live action, and deliver a faithful adaptation that appeases the majority of audiences. Something I believe a lot of writers could learn from when it comes to developing an adaptation for something like a video game. I'm going to leave it there though. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this, hit the thumbs up and subscribe for more week to week and full season reviews like this. Check out my Last of Us Part 1 playthroughs, and until next time everyone, take care, and I will catch you soon.